So I think just making sure that your partner does know your goals. And even if it's to the extent of like, hey, this is what I want. If anybody tries to question why we're going to have this kind of birth, I need you to be able to explain why so that they're not receiving pushback. And so that doesn't even create fear within your partner because your partner needs to be just as positive and encouraging going into it as you are.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. All right, welcome back to the podcast. This week's reviewer of the week is Care Bear 21. She says, so thankful for this podcast. I am so thankful for this podcast. I'm 26 weeks pregnant with my first, and I have been listening to this podcast for the majority of my pregnancy, and I love it. I used to think that if I ever got pregnant, I would definitely want to have a cesarean birth because the thought of having my baby vaginally absolutely terrified me, which I love that she shared this. And I don't know that I've ever really talked about this on the podcast before, but that is a legitimate fear for some women. So if this is you, I guess listen up because you're not alone. And I think that's really important. But she said, well, not anymore. I look forward to trying my absolute best to have not just a vaginal birth, but an unmedicated vaginal birth. And that is all thanks to this podcast. I feel so much more confident and educated about birth that I actually look forward to it now. I always look forward to that time of day where I can just turn on the podcast and just listen to these ladies talk. I'm not even halfway done with the podcasts, but I'm already sad just thinking about once I'll be caught up and won't have anything to listen to daily. Thanks so much for this podcast. Thanks for being there. Thanks for including all of that awesome information. And it's so funny because I have a great deal of moms who actually stick around postpartum. We do cover postpartum topics, but I love that like once you get involved with birth, you might not want to leave at all. You might be back here for just more information for that next birth or to pass on to other people. So stick around. Today, you guys, I'm so happy to have with me Morgan. She is here to tell us all about her incredible birth story. So I will let you take a moment, Morgan. Please say hi, introduce yourself, and then I want to ask you a little bit about your pregnancy.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. So I am a mom to two. I have a 2-year-old. He's actually going to be 2.5 soon. And then my youngest is about to be 11 months old. They're a lot. Everybody always asks. I get the typical, oh, you've got your hands full. Yes, I do. But I also have a very full heart. I hope to have more babies. So anyways, I am a stay-at-home mom. My husband is a farmer and we also ranch. So tending to things is kind of just I guess it's our thing. We live a pretty simple life, as simple as it can be. And yeah.
I love that. Morgan, where are you located? Just like what state are you in? You don't have to go
We're
too
in the
detailed.
panhandle of Texas.
Okay, that's so neat. Just the thought of like that is a dream of mine, like a distant one, because that's not how we raised our children. And we kept saying, like, if we have kids as we get older, and then that did not happen. But we're like, we just want to be on farmland and we want them to run free and just enjoy it and live simply. And so I love that you're sharing that. I love that you get to do that. That's really special. Have you guys did you grow up on farms or like what's your experience with this kind of lifestyle?
So I did not, but my husband, he's a 4th-generation farmer. So hopefully our boys get to carry that on.
I love it. I absolutely love that. And I feel like people are, more excited about that nowadays than they ever have been, or at least going back to that kind of lifestyle. So you're living it and it makes me so excited. So
Yes.
Good for you. That's so cool. Okay, sorry, that was a little off topic, but let's talk about your pregnancy a little bit. So this birth story today, so you have two. So we're talking about your most recent birth. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, with that, tell me a little bit about this pregnancy. And if at any point you're wanting to compare it or kind of draw some parallels to what it was like before or how it was different, I would love to hear that too. But tell me about this pregnancy. Was there anything unique to this one, or kind of how was it different than the last? Did you have any like funny things going on during the pregnancy, or was it pretty straightforward?
I have been very blessed. Both of my pregnancies were pretty easygoing. I didn't have any morning sickness, maybe a little nausea here and there, but nothing major. I the main thing that was different about this pregnancy is I did have more pelvic pressure, which that can be common with subsequent pregnancies. So it was a really smooth one. Whereas my first pregnancy, even though it was smooth, I did have gestational diabetes and I continued to have an increase in my blood pressure, which did ultimately lead that pregnancy to being an induction, which, having gone through what I went through with that pregnancy, led me to know that I could totally get away with an induction for this second. So it was, I mean, my pregnancy, I couldn't ask for a better one. I was able to remain active. I was not active with my first pregnancy. I mean, I did a little bit, but I mean, I worked out pretty much every day with my second pregnancy. Yeah, it was, I like being pregnant. I love it. I know it's not for everybody, but I love being pregnant. I told my husband I'll have 30 kids if you let me.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, in farm life, I feel like you totally could. You'd fit right in. That would be so fun. My goodness. Okay, so I kind of love that actually, like the side by side there. At what point were you diagnosed with gestational diabetes with your first, and how did that change what you did with your next pregnancy?
So I got diagnosed at the typical screening. I did the 1 hour test, had to go back, did the 3 hour test, and I was able to control it with my diet. So it wasn't super severe. I didn't have to take insulin or anything like that. I just checked it every day. And even my OB, he had told me towards the end of pregnancy, is like, I'm not worried about baby's weight or anything, which he came out small anyways. So going into this other pregnancy, I just took everything I had learned from my first pregnancy and incorporated it into this one from the beginning. I had also learned in between children that you should like eat your protein and eat your greens before you eat your carbs. Like if you're to look at your plate, even if you're eating a sandwich, they say like, separate your food out if you can. I didn't necessarily do that, but it was something that I kept in mind throughout all of my meals. And just really kept that protein intake up. And then I even took the fresh test for my second pregnancy. I didn't have that option. I was actually the second person to request it at our OB's office. So that was really exciting to know that. And so I've been able to help other people like, hey, take the fresh test, ask them about it. Like that it's an option. So anyways, it did help. I think that knowledge from having gestational diabetes at the first pregnancy, I think it really just did help me be more aware of what I was putting into my body.
Yeah, that's awesome. You talked about high protein and also movement, like which we know, right? Studies show 55% decrease of gestational diabetes if you can do those things prior to pregnancy and especially early on. So you just kind of nailed it. Like that's exactly what women needed to hear. So I really appreciate that. For those who are listening and have not, maybe this is your first time tuning in or you have not heard of the fresh test, we're going to put a link for that below in the show notes. You can find more information there. But I had her on, I'm blanking on her name, but the creator and owner of the company, I had her on. And so for those who are listening, it's just excellent. I do recommend it to all of our moms. And it's a great alternative to having to put all the like nasty corn syrupy dyed, stuff into your body for that glucose test. And there's a coupon code for that as well. So make sure that you check that out. Okay, so how about your providers? Did you have an OB? Did you have a midwife? Did you use the same provider that you used with your first, with your second? What was that like?
Yes, so I did use an OB in our area. I just wasn't very comfortable finding a midwife. There's another larger town that's a little bit further away than the one we had to travel to. My nearest hospital was 45 minutes. So that's something to be aware of too. Those moms who are just like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I can make it to a hospital. And I know there's those fears. So anyways, I did use an OB and I had kind of debated early in my second pregnancy, like, should I look for a different one just because he did induce me? But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be very open with him that, like, even my experience with my birth after the induction, I didn't need to be induced. My blood pressure remained amazing throughout that whole time. So I was like, are you really going to push induction on me? And he said, I am so sorry if you felt that you were pressured and you didn't have a choice. But I was just following I'm a first time mom. I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing. Like, I'm trusting you as my provider. And so, anyways, he was like, I'm so sorry you felt pressured. I really want you to know that it is an option for you to decline it. He said, I will let you know if there's not an option. Like it's very dangerous if you don't get induced. But he said, I don't foresee that. You've done great. Your weight is healthy. You're exercising. Everything looks good. So I stuck with him. He did not get to deliver my second baby. He was not the doctor on call. But I mean, I am glad I stuck with him. I was very comfortable with him. It was actually kind of, I say it's a God thing how he came about. My first pregnancy was actually a miscarriage, and the doctor that I was going to be seeing, she was on maternity leave. And so he took care of me during my miscarriage. And I always said, oh, I'm never going to have a male doctor. It just made me nervous to have a male doctor. And, anyways, like I said, it turned out to be really great.
That's awesome. And it sounds like he was saying, the right things, not just saying the right things, but it sounded like he cared. And you were able to kind of have a discussion with him and he alleviated your fears instead of, sometimes we see them being increased. But that wasn't the case. It seems like he was, just like a nice, good person to deal with. And that's what every mom deserves. So that's really great. Yeah. How about your birth partner? How did he support you? How did you guys work together? How did he feel about your providers and your pregnancy? What kind of conversations did you guys have around that? And what did you guys do to prepare together?
Yeah. So my birth partner, my husband, he is such a blessing. He actually has a malformation in his arm, and he has had over 70 surgeries in his life on it. So he is very queasy. He doesn't love hospitals. Blood, needles. We actually thought he would, like, before we had my first, we thought for sure he was going to pass out. He wasn't going to be able to be much help. And he was amazing. He did great. The worst part, so my first birth, I did have an epidural, and that was the only thing that made him queasy. As far as like practicing like counter pressures and things like that, it's because of that malformation. He really couldn't do any of that, but he always would support me and tell me like, hey, you know what, you're going to have the birth you want. We're going to do this. It's going to be great. We're going to be at the hospital at the perfect time. You're not going to need an epidural. Just always giving me those affirmations right back. And if I ever expressed any doubts or fears, he was there to just sit there and say, hey, we don't know what the future holds, but we know we're going to have a healthy baby at the end of it.
I love that. Yeah, emotional support and having good communication with your birth partner throughout is like, of the highest regard, really. Having those like tips and tricks that we use and that hands-on stuff, that is excellent too. But I know I've talked about this before, but there were studies that were done with like quote unquote doulas, right? And like a position of the only thing that you're going to do is be next to mom, hold space for her, hold her hand occasionally, like you're just being present. And those, like in those studies, the women had, a greater experience, less chance of using an epidural or interventions, less chance for cesarean birth. So it's not just the hands-on stuff. And I love that you shared that. And that he's able to be such a great support, being present. I think for moms that are listening, and if you're looking at what you can tell dad right now, being present, not being on your phone, being really good at communicating, encouraging, all that kind of stuff is exactly what she needs. Did you guys come across any challenges then, or anything that you felt like you needed to discuss together during pregnancy that you think would be helpful for other moms and dads to hear?
We've always been really good communicators. So he knew from the beginning, especially after like having, I'm not going to call it a fail. It wasn't a failed birth with our first, by any means, but because we didn't have the birth that I really hoped for, he knew my expectations. He knew what I like really valued. So really, because he knew those things, I think just having that open communication so that they truly know what your plans are. I mean, he took the birth course with me. He didn't take it the second time with me because I refreshed myself, but he was like, okay, yeah, I've got this. Nope. no worries, I'll be there for you. So I think just making sure that your partner does know your goals, and even if it's to the extent of like, hey, this is what I want. If anybody tries to question why we're going to have this kind of birth, I need you to be able to explain why so that they're not receiving pushback. And so that doesn't even create fear within your partner, because your partner needs to be just as positive and encouraging going into it as you are.
Yeah, I agree with you. For curious about how you guys prepare together and like even though second time maybe you didn't go back through the birth course with your husband, but when you guys were learning about those things together, were there things that stood out that you're like, I took that with me all the way through to that birth and the next birth? What things stood out to you that you feel like are so important that everyone should know about it?
It's a good question. I feel like everything, just because. So I'll put it this way. My take on giving birth with my oldest, whenever I was pregnant with him, in the beginning, I was like, you don't need a birth course. Like, who needs a birth course? Like, everybody does this. Like, it's just whenever your time comes, like, you just figure out how to have the baby. Your doctor helps you and tells you, and you don't need. But then my thinking changed. I don't know what changed it, but out of nowhere, I was like, you know what? Back in the day, you had your mom. You were in there watching her give birth to your siblings, or your grandma was there and she told you everything. Your aunts, your cousins, your sisters, like everybody was together because they lived multi generationally, and everybody just kind of, all the women were there to take care of each other. And so I was like, I've never seen anybody give birth. Yeah, you hear little snippets here and there, but you truly aren't prepared the way they used to be. And so it's like, I've got to take a birth course. So even like learning the different stations of the baby, that's like knowing where your baby is high or low, like it can really help you. So with my first, he actually stayed very high. Being an induction, he wasn't ready to come out yet. And so he was up still really high. And I had to push quite a bit for a while just to get him down where he needed to be. It wasn't necessarily me pushing, trying to get him out, but it was just trying to get him down lower. And I could tell, I knew when my baby was ready to come the second time around. I felt it in the car. It was just like, okay, like he's going to be here before I know it. And I never felt that with my first, just because I was having to push him there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's the most important. It's so hard to say what you should carry through.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think I'm with you. I think there is just the importance of taking a course and feeling prepared, like having all of that knowledge. Like I say, like it's the birth prep and your provider, right? Like those two things make the biggest difference in your life. So, like, why not grab all the knowledge that you can? I am curious, and I know other moms want to know, what kind of preparation did you do kind of like on the daily? Like, did you use the exercises? Did you use meditation? Did you use any like mental work? Like, what did you do to prepare yourself for the process of labor?
I did do the 3 exercises every day without fail. And then I did do exercising at least 5 days a week, sometimes more. Every now and then you could say I probably did 3 or 4 workouts a week. But I mean, I remained very active because I knew that was important. Preparing your body to have that endurance to be able to get through labor and delivery is really important. And so I made sure to continue on with things like that. I mean, eating healthy, eating those proper nutritious foods. And then I did towards like the end of pregnancy, whenever you start to get to those certain time frames where you need to start thinking about preparing your body in other ways versus just physical endurance. So like doing evening primrose oil, I did that. I always upped my tea, the red raspberry leaf tea. I started drinking that very early on in pregnancy, just with a cup whenever I remembered to. I didn't do it daily in the beginning. And then I started to get where I did daily, and then I did 2 cups a day. And like I said, I just continued to increase it more so throughout my pregnancy. Yeah, I mean, exercise, nutrition, and I did a lot of yoga ball work too. I like on top of exercises. I did stretches. I totally stalked Shay on her Instagram page, and then and Lizzie, Doc Lizzie. I followed a lot of her PT stuff. I
That's
did end up
awesome.
seeing a therapist just because of the pressure I was feeling. And I decided to go ahead and go on with a physical therapist and work with her. And she gave me a lot of great tips and things like that as well.
That's so fun. I love that. All right, let's get to your birth. So tell me from that very first contraction all the way through what it was like.
Yeah, so I didn't feel contractions at first. My water actually started breaking first. I was on the phone with my mom. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just having a random little chat. And my mom had always told me, she's like, you're going to have this baby early. I just know you are. My due date was June 23rd, according to the OB. My due date was June 19th, according to ovulation. I know what day I ovulated on, so I never let that waver. I just allowed him to say, hey, your due date is June 23rd. But I was like, no, it's not. I did end up having him on June 5th. So if you take that into the OB's due date, it was 37 weeks and 3 days. And my brother in law actually was getting married June 10th. And so I had just continued to pray, if I have this baby early, June 10th was a Saturday. And I was like, if I have this baby early, please let it be no later than Tuesday. Like, I cannot have him after Tuesday. He's going to have to wait till after the wedding because me, my husband, and our oldest were all in the wedding. And so that Monday, like I said, I was on the phone with my mom and I felt a little bit of a trickle. And I was like, did I just pee myself? Like, I've peed myself a few times in like earlier in pregnancy and this didn't feel the same. I don't know. And my mom was like, oh my gosh, your water broke. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And I was like, I'm going to go to the bathroom really quick and see if I have to go to the bathroom. And I mean, I did. So I was like, I think I might have just peed myself. And she was like, no, I don't think so. And so we continued to talk on the phone and still wasn't feeling any contractions or anything. And so I felt another little trickle about 15 minutes after that. And I was like, okay, maybe she is right. And I was like, well, maybe I just didn't empty my bladder. I was still in denial because I was like, I didn't experience this with my first. I didn't know what it was like. And then I did have a gush. And so I was like, okay, so I put on a pad and I decided to kind of continue to do things. And I was like, well, let me call my husband. And so I got off the phone with her and I called him. And he had actually been at the farm shop. He was trying to get some things done there. And he's like, well, do I need to come home right now? And I was like, no, I think you're fine. Like, I'm not noticing any contractions. So if you want, you can finish up there and then get home. And so then right after that, I realized, you know what? Like maybe I am feeling contractions. I'm feeling really mild cramping, like almost unnoticeable. And that was at 5:54, so right before 6 o'clock. And once I noticed that, I called my husband back and I was like, well, I did feel a contraction, so I'm going to keep you posted, but maybe go ahead and just head home. And so I started timing contractions. The way I was timing it was just like, so if you know me, it's so me. I just texted the time to him. I was like, hey, 5:54 contraction, whatever the times were. And so that way I could look back at it and see how far apart they were because I didn't have a timer downloaded on my phone anymore from my last, and I didn't expect to go into labor this early. And so everything seemed about 10, 15 minutes apart. And so I was like, well, it'll probably be a long night of this. I don't think things are going to pick up super quick, but let me get things ready. Like I said, we were about to be in a wedding in 5 days. So I needed to make sure my son, his clothes were ready to go for the wedding in case we had an extended stay in the hospital or something and somebody needed to pick up his clothes. They still needed to be dry cleaned. So I got his clothes ready for the wedding. I gathered my husband's clothes for the wedding. My dress was still at the store because it was getting altered. And so I was like, well, hopefully we can get that picked up if it comes time to it. And so anyways, we got everything ready as far as that goes. I started packing my bag. My husband got home. My mom said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and come because she was the one that was in charge of keeping my oldest. And so she was like, I'll bring y'all supper. That way you have something to eat before you go. And so she got here a little after my husband did. She picked up my son, took him. She lived actually an hour and 30 minutes away, but the way our towns worked, we were 45 minutes from the hospital, but she was only 30 minutes. We were kind of like a little L shape, if you will. Anyways, she goes and takes him. My husband says, why don't you take a shower, go lay in bed? That way maybe you can get some sleep before we have to go if it's like 12 o'clock and you realize like we've got to get to the hospital. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a plan. I did have a doula, so I had texted her. I let her know everything going on. I planned on a birth photographer, so I texted her and I was like, hey, do you think you're going to be able to make it? I think I'm probably going to have this baby maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, like just a heads up. So they're both aware. My oldest is taken care of. And so I did. I got in the shower and then I went and laid down. And I told my husband, I was like, ugh, us being 45 minutes away, it just makes me nervous. What if we don't make it to the hospital? Like, I do want to make it to the hospital. So maybe let's go ahead and head in. We'll get a hotel and I can labor at the hotel for as long as possible. And he's like, okay, if that's what you really think is necessary, that's fine. And I was like, that way you're not having to drive like 110 miles an hour down the interstate. And so we get there, or no, we hadn't left just yet. I called my doula and I let her know, hey, we're going to go ahead and head to Amarillo. And she's like, hey, well, there's also another place you can stay at if you need to, that's specifically for like moms. If you want the address, I can send it to you. And so I was like, no, it's okay. I'll let you know when we get to Amarillo. That's the city. I'll let you know when we get there. And if I think we're going to go to the hospital, I'll tell you as soon as possible. I called my doctor's office because my doctor always said, hey, keep me informed. I called him and basically I just decided let's go straight to the hospital. We had been in the car and I just felt that was most comfortable as we got into the edge of town, and we got there at 10. This was now 10:14 in the evening, and we get to the hospital. My husband's looking for a parking spot and he was going to drop me off at the front door. And I said, no, I'm not walking in by myself. Like you're going to go in with me. So park the car. So we parked and I just took in, the only thing I took in was my birth plan because I was like, I am making sure to have my paper copy of my birth plan to hand to somebody right away. So there's no excuses of why they can't get all of my wishes if need be. So we walk in and there was nobody at the front desk. So, because we of course had to go in through the ER and there was nobody at the front desk. I was like, are you serious? They finally get somebody there and they put me in a wheelchair and I hadn't noticed it, but I was like, I guess I wasn't sitting like I normally would. I was kind of having to lean because baby was so low. I knew he was low, but I didn't notice that I was having to kind of like not sit properly. And they wheel me to labor and delivery, and the triage, or not the triage nurse, what is the word I'm looking for? Charge nurse. The charge nurse, she had taken note of how I was sitting, and she said, no, let's actually put her in this room. And I was like, where are y'all taking me? Like, she didn't give an explanation. She was telling the other nurses. So she was picking up on like, I was about to have this baby, and I was still thinking in my mind, I was like, oh, it's going to be all night of this, not having this baby till tomorrow. Like, I had no idea. So they get me in the room, and I told them, like, hey, can my husband go to the car and get our things? So he leaves. He goes to the car, and I said, may I go to the bathroom? I need to go to the bathroom. I can tell I need to go to the bathroom. So I went in there, and the nurse, she's like hollering all the questions to me, like, hey, when did this start? And, getting all of my medical information. And I decided, like, okay, I'm done. I start walking and I'm like, I don't think I can walk to the bed. Like, I'm not going to be able to get there. And like, can we go ahead and put you in a gown? Like, I still had on my clothes. So they're like, can we go ahead and put you in a gown? Like, let's get you on the bed and get you checked. And I was like, okay. And so I was like, I lay down and they check me and they're like, okay, she's an antlip 9 and yeah, she's ready. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? What's an antlip? I don't know what you're saying. They're like, you're 9.5 centimeters. And I was like, what? My husband's not even in here. I need to text my doula. I need to text my birth photographer. Like, nobody's here. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I going to push this baby out before he comes back in the room? And I started to panic a little bit, but all was fine. My husband walked in the door. I was able to text my doula, texted my birth photographer. We had been at the hospital, I think, a total of 15 minutes, I believe it was. And my doctor had come in, not my actual OB, but another one from the same practice. He came in and he was like, just whenever you're ready, let me know. And I was like, okay, I'm not ready to push this baby out yet. Like, my doula is not here. So I was like, I'm going to wait. And so anyways, my husband was like, are you sure? Like, you look like you're ready to push. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't think so. Like, no, I think I was just in complete denial because I was like, I didn't get to experience any of this. So with my son, it was just like, okay, like they coached me on everything. I did the forced pushing and I was like, well, I really wanted to try pushing on my hands and knees this time. Like, I think I want to roll over. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, that's okay. And then I tried to roll over and I was like, no, I can't do it. I can't move. I am stuck right here. So I made sure that the bed, they had it reclined back pretty far. And I was like, nope, this is not going to work. I'm going to push it as far forward as I possibly can. And I said, I think I'm ready to push. And so I go ahead and ask the doctor to come back in. And then he's like, okay, if you're ready, let's go. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know how to push. In my mind, I was like, I had an epidural last time. Like, you couldn't actually feel it. Like, how am I supposed to truly push this baby out? Like, it's just, my mind is so, it's in a mess. And so finally I was like, okay, I know how to push. I know how to do this. They were like, just bear down. And I was like, okay. And so I just sat there. I took a deep breath and I was like, Lord, please be with me. I just said all my prayers, my affirmations. I said a few pushes and this baby's going to be in my arms. And sure enough, 2 pushes and he was there. My doula, she made it literally split seconds after I pushed him out. She said she could hear me coming down the hall. And my birth photographer, she made it somehow, some way she made it. And it was just, it was so fast and so easygoing. I shouldn't say it was that easygoing. My husband said I did make sounds that sounded like demons were coming out of me. Those low tones that you just kind of just let flow out of you. You have no control over. And
Yes.
it was beautiful. It was everything I could have imagined, even though I had those quick moments of fear, like, how am I going to push? It was perfect. I had prayed throughout pregnancy. Let us be there whenever the time is right. Let us go to the hospital at the right time. And I mean, 15 minutes
Wow.
before you push the baby out, I say that's pretty good timing.
I mean, that's what every woman desires to do when they're going unmedicated and want to spend the majority of time at home. So you nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Wow. What a whirlwind. I feel like I do have questions because I want to hear. At the beginning, you described your contractions. You said they were kind of like maybe just mild cramps, and once you like paid attention to them, then you realized they were there. How did those progress for you? Like even when you got in the car and stuff, what was that like? So what did it feel like? How did it change? Were you noticing? Were they getting longer, stronger, closer together? Were you still keeping track of them? And then what were you doing to work through them?
Yeah, so they did get closer together. The closest mine ever really got were about 5 minutes. I think I had a couple that were 4 minutes apart, but they didn't ever really get. And so that was another thing. Like I was kind of waiting for him to get past that because I was like, well, like the 3-1-1 rule, and
Yeah.
that was not the case for me. I never would have gotten there. And so the cramping did get a little more intense. It never got super strong. So and maybe that's because I compare it to my first, who I had intense back labor that led me to getting the epidural. I did not have any back labor this time, just the mild cramping, kind of the way you describe it in the birth course, just wrapping around your tummy, just starting kind of more towards my sides, and you just feel it tightening and towards the front. And to get through it, I noticed it was getting a lot stronger whenever we were in the car because I was having to, whenever I called my OB's office just to let him know, hey, I am headed to the hospital, I did have to sit there and just kind of, I would tell the nurse, just a moment, sit there, pause, breathe through it. And I just did like large, large deep breaths. Took in as much air as I could and let it all out. And I think that was probably what really got me through everything. I had in my suitcase, I had combs packed to squeeze combs. Obviously didn't get those out because we didn't even have the time for that. I had honey for energy for if pushing took a long time or anything like that. Um, I even packed my TINS unit, a massage gun, and we didn't need anything. So I was more
I
than
love that.
prepared, and we didn't use a single bit of it. So really, it was just the breathing to get through those contractions, and even then, for me personally, it wasn't that bad. And that's where I put in a testimony to like things like red raspberry leaf tea and exercising and things like really truly preparing your body. There's so many benefits to it.
Yeah. Did you, from one birth to the other, since you you had Pitocin, since you had an induction with the first one,
Mm-hmm.
did you notice a difference between those contractions versus not having Pitocin?
So I will say with Pitocin, they were brutal. I did not like those contractions. I had the back labor, and then with the Pitocin, I just felt like everything was just so forced. Even though I did take things like the red raspberry leaf tea and those things, I feel like my body knew what to do with that birth, but my body just really wasn't prepared because it wasn't time for me to have the baby. And so I really think my personal opinion and experience is that contractions are not as pleasant with Pitocin. They're not the end of the world, but they are not as pleasant.
Yeah. And I think that's the general consensus. We have had some moms who are like, it really is fine. But I do think that tends to be the minority and not the majority of how people would describe that. And hearing just the difference from you, one birth to another, or explaining contractions, one birth to another. I mean, I think that's a really good example of that. So that's really neat. You did mention that you used some moaning and some noises. I'm kind of laughing that your husband called it demons. My husband called it screaming goats, but we all have the sounds that we make, and it's totally normal. It's totally fine. But with that, at which point, like, was that when you were hitting transition? Because you probably have to look back and say that was transition, because you must not have realized it when you were going through if you were 9.5 centimeters when you got there. So at what point did you utilize that moaning? And did that come very naturally for you? And then also, did you notice transition at all?
I'm going to say I didn't notice transition. I mean, maybe it was whenever we got to the hospital and I said I needed to go to the bathroom. I did go to the bathroom. Like I said, I feel like I need to poop. And so I did. And so maybe even that, because I mean, we know it's common as moms, especially if you've had your first baby, it's common to poop during delivery. And I know some people are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear that. But it's natural, and that comes from that pushing. And so I feel like maybe that's when it happened. And even like I said, I was scared I wasn't even going to make it to the bed walking over there. I would take a moment to pause, to breathe through those contractions and things like that. But it's hard to say. I can't pinpoint a moment where it was just a super big change. I never got nauseous during transition or anything like that. So it was a pretty seamless thing. Just things got a little more intense gradually until he was here. The moaning and all of that, I'm gonna say it was natural because it just came out of me, and that was just during pushing. I just allowed my body to kind of go through it.
That's so neat. What a neat story to have. And now, and knowing like you like to be pregnant too, I'm like, you very well could have 30 kids at this point. Like, that sounds
I know, I'm
awesome.
like, if they continue to be this easy, I shouldn't call it easy,
Yeah.
because I mean, it
Yeah.
was easy now looking back. In those moments, I probably was thinking like, oh my gosh, this is not easy. But I mean, I would if my husband would let me. He says our number is 4. He's pretty set on 4. I said we'll see.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah. Communication, right? That's what it's all about. It's so funny. Oh, that is such a neat story. How was your postpartum? Did you have any tearing? Did you have any like latching issues? How was your recovery? What did your postpartum look like?
So immediately I did have some like very low grade hemorrhaging. So they did give me Pitocin afterwards. They had actually asked if I wanted it, and I was like, no, like let's wait a little bit longer. Like let's see if things can be managed. And they decided they were like, if you really refuse it, like that's fine, but we are really worried. And so I was like, okay, let's go ahead and do some Pitocin. And of course, them rubbing on your belly, like that's just, to me, that was the worst thing I had postpartum. I had no tearing. I didn't have tearing with the first one. I am a huge advocate for perineal massages. I totally believe in them. I think that is like key to helping not tear. And it's not the only thing, but I totally believe in it. But other than that, everything was pretty smooth. My bleeding, I've actually seen through the Facebook group, people who are members of Taking the Birth course and stuff. Somebody had asked about bleeding and like it bleeding, stopping, bleeding again. And I did experience that. I think it was right at 11 weeks when it finally stopped. And I was worried, like, am I already receiving my cycle again? Like, what's going on? And so I was calling my doctor and they're like, no, each postpartum is going to be different with each baby, but don't worry. So I know moms who get nervous about the postpartum bleeding. It's normal if it lightens and even goes away for a little bit and comes back. Latching, that was good. I could tell very early on that he had a lip tie. My oldest had a lip tie, and I never got it diagnosed till he was a year old. And I know that's why we probably had some struggles with our breastfeeding journey there, but I am still to this day nursing, exclusively nursing, and it's been great. It was my goal, and it's been a beautiful experience. I mean, my first was just as beautiful of an experience, but I've really gotten to get what I wanted out of labor and delivery, pregnancy, postpartum with this second one.
That's so neat. And it's got to be so fun sharing that with your first baby too, having them kind of there with each other and enjoying that time together. I love it. Tell me before we jump off here, and I want to thank you for your time a ton because this has been a really neat experience to get to live and walk through with you. But tell me what your very best advice for moms and for dads who are listening would be.
I definitely think it is so important to educate yourself. Educate yourself on, okay, if your birth plan, you have it, everybody has their plan, which I think now you're calling it a map. Is that correct? A birth map?
Yep, birth map.
Yes, so your birth map. So if for some reason you make a wrong turn or something happens, there's a detour, like make sure you know your options really well because you want to be confident in what you're going to be going into. So you don't want to just be like, well, I'll just leave it up to the professionals. I hate to say this because it's not the same in every place, but my experience with the hospital birth, they're going to probably take the route that's easier for them, especially if they have a lot of other moms that are in labor and delivery. They're going to do what they can to make their jobs a little bit easier. Not saying that that's going to take away from your experience, because it might be what's best for you after all, but just being educated and everything and making sure that your birth partner knows your plan.
I love it. And then how about for dads? Is that the same advice? Just moms and dads?
Dads, I think you just really need to be there. Give that affirmations, reminding your significant other that, hey, like, you can do this. Hard things are possible. Each contraction is getting you closer to baby, all of those great things. I think it's just so important for you to be encouraging to your wife. If she gets mad at you, just brush it off. Don't get mad back. Have a lot of grace for her because she's going through something that's completely changing her body, and it's going to take some time to get used to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Morgan. Thank you for your time and for your incredible story and for all the women that you're going to be able to touch, being able to share this. So I appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.